We know that it's human when listening. Sometimes a word will go in one ear and out the other without having the brain really analyzed it and understood what was being said. We know that through conversation, and we know that when we're teaching. The question is, how do we get students to really think about what we're saying and remember it and understand it so things don't go in one ear and out the other? Hi, I'm Keith Dills. I'm the Pittsburgh Pedagogue, and I'm Dean of the College of Education at Slippery Rock University. And I want to talk today about this idea of getting students to think about what it is that you're trying to teach them so that things don't go in one ear and out the other. There was a joke that they asked, well, how is this teacher teaching? And they said, well, things were going from their notebook onto the board and from the board onto the student's notebook without ever having any of that information go in the brain of either the teacher or the student. And of course, we don't want that to happen. We want both the teacher to be thinking and the student to be thinking. And the best way to do that is what we would like to call a bell ringer or an anticipatory set. And what this does, it really creates several different things. One thing is it uses preconceptions, things that students haven't thought through real well. And we can look at paradoxes, we can look at things that just aren't clear on the surface and challenge students in their thinking. We can create ambiguity. In other words, boy, it's just not clear what is going on here. And that spurs curiosity and it makes the brain want to figure these things out. The brain wants to be in equilibrium. It doesn't want to be thrown off. And so good teachers will use that aspect of the brain to really get the students to think. And also this creates an emotional response. We know we can create stronger memories when there's an emotion involved. If you've ever been in a fender bender in a car or something along those lines, sometimes you'll never even forget what was on the radio at that time because it was a scary situation. So we want to use emotion in a positive sense, which really uses a bell ringer in a way that gets people to think and react and be puzzled and sparks their curiosity in a way that also involves a little bit of emotion. So today we're going to use two examples in math, one example in social studies, and one example in language arts, reading, or English about things that we can do to deal with those aspects of creating a bell ringer and getting students to really think about what we're talking about. There's a birthday paradox, and it goes like this. You could use this as a bell ringer for students in a math class and say, if you were in a room, how many other people would have to be in that room until there's somebody that has the same birthday as you do, and there's a 50% chance or better that would take place? So that's a curious question. You've got them thinking. And so what you could do is give them hints on the board and scaffold this and say, what numbers could you possibly use? And so you want to get the idea that there are 365 days normally. There's a leap year, it could be 366, but just for argument's sake, let's say there's 365 opportunities for birthdays to occur in a normal year. Do you think it's 365? Is it 300? Is it 200? And then you could ask, why do you think that? Well, the answer is really dealing with this idea of preconceptions, because nobody's going to come up with, unless they've heard of this before, the number 23. And indeed, that's the exact answer. 23 folks in a room is required before you get to a 50% probability that somebody else has the same birthday. Wow. Now you created an ambiguity. How could that possibly be? That just doesn't make sense. 50%? Why isn't it something like half of 365? Doesn't that make more sense? Isn't that what's in my mind, that number? So mathematics and probability gets a little bit more abstract. And so what comes immediately to mind isn't always the right answer. And I think that's a good intellectual skill for students to have, to check, is what first comes to mind the right answer? Does it require more thought and more investigation? And these are the kind of habits of mind that intelligent and informed folks develop, and that you as a teacher develop. And that can happen through the use of these bell ringers. And so here's a graphic of the chance of a birthday paradox, and the idea that there's something called exponentially increasing or decreasing chances. And the fact that the number 23 is really the number of pairs of folks that could match a birthday. And so it's not just you and the other 23, or the other 22, but it's the 22 with you and within themselves. And so this shows the decreasing chances of not matching. And of course, that means increasing chances of actually matching, and a formula that's used to spell this all out. And so you could use this if you're trying to get at probability in math. You could use this as a bell ringer if you're just trying to get at the use of fractions, and an interesting and advanced look at this, but at least to wet the whistle of students that, boy, there's a whole lot more that math can answer than what first meets the eye. And I think you can really get folks to focus and get an emotional response that, wow, math is a powerful thing, and I'm interested and curious to know a little bit more about this. Here's another question that you could ask. How long would it take to double your money at 8% interest? And so again, you could give folks a range to pick from, and say, is it 50 years? Is it 20 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 5 years? And so I think a preconception is 8% it seems low, and it would take a long time to double your money there. And that preconception, a lot of people don't save because they don't understand the concept of compounded interest. And so there's an ambiguity here once you see the answer, that in fact it's only 9 years. And there's a rule of 72, which is very, very interesting, that you can find the number of years required to double your money at a given interest rate. You just divide the interest rate into 72. And so, wow, how is it that a simple rule like that could actually work? And how is it that you can actually double your money in 9 years? And why aren't more people doing this? And this is emotional and meaningful because you're talking about money and potentially life-altering decisions by understanding the idea of compounded interest. And really, this is this idea of exponential growth, just like the birthday issue. In social studies, how about an ethical decision? You could create an ambiguous situation here by saying, should Truman, the president at the end of World War II, be charged with a war crime for dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And so that's an ambiguous question. Certainly he shouldn't have been, right? Because he wasn't. But you might use this to drive a unit that would look at, are there rules to war? Is it silly to have rules of war? What is ethics? And what are some of the decision-making heuristics? It's a big word, but rules and approaches to figuring out what's right and wrong. And you could even cover the concept of utility, right? The greatest good for the greatest number, which is one tool to look at to see, was it ethically or morally right? And are those different than the actual rules of war and the Geneva Convention and such? So I think creating ambiguity, challenging the preconception that just because the winners of the history necessarily need to be right, and that no analysis personally is warranted. I think you can challenge that preconception to say, no, that there are ways that we can look at history in order to learn from it. And is this a good lesson to learn, or is this something we should avoid? And you can make that a little bit emotional. And of course, you don't necessarily want to guide folks to adopt your understanding of this. You want to develop and provide the tools and get them to think on their own and justify what's the reason why that you believe this was right or wrong. Why? Gets at thinking. And then finally, in English and language arts, comparison and contrast can be an easy way to deal with preconceptions, to create a little bit of an ambiguity, and to make something meaningful. And so instead of just telling folks, it's better to show and not tell right out, again, one in one ear and out the other, it might be better to say and look and say, compare and contrast these two sentences. And so you can guide the discovery about what is difference between these two and what maybe is better and what is more effective, and then lead them to talk about the essential principle of showing versus telling in writing and how important that could be. Several different examples of how to create a bell ringer, an anticipatory set that deals with preconceptions, things that students haven't really considered in depth. And it gets at an ambiguity, which is an answer that wasn't expected. And the students have to figure out, why is that? This is throwing me off. My brain is in a little bit disequilibrium here. How can I get my mind right with the world, and to use these heuristics, these tools, these models for figuring things out, and create more of an equilibrium and an understanding. And in doing so, you're going to create an emotional response in your students. You're going to make it more likely that they're going to chew on the information that is important for them to learn. It won't go in one ear and out the other ear, but also will develop these ways of thinking and encouraging your students to think. And how important is that for your students to learn? I'm Keith Dills. I'm the Pittsburgh Pedagogue, Dean of the College of Education at Slippery Rock University, wishing you all the best of luck as you develop these terrific learning tools.